Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a battle or a banquet, but with something much more intimate. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. We're entering the damp, misunderstood, and faintly herbal world of medieval hygiene. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The smell hits first. It's not the nose-wrinkling kind that makes you recoil. It's deeper, more complex. A broth of damp wool, sweet herbs, stale body, and the faint copper tang of iron tools and unwashed feet. You follow a crooked street in the shadow of towering thatch-roofed buildings, past a butcher's stall where something unspeakable drips into a bucket, and you realize nobody's been scrubbed in weeks, maybe months. You pass under a swinging wooden sign with a faded painting of bathhouse, what's left of it anyway. Its doors are boarded up, the windows smudged with soot. Once, it bustled with townsfolk soaking in hot communal tubs, laughing, gossiping, maybe even flirting. Now it stands silent. The people didn't stop bathing because they got lazy. They stopped because they got scared. By the time the 14th century rolled around, the fear of death had a new partner: paranoia about pores. Hot water, they believed, opened your skin to invisible forces. Not the refreshing spot A kind of pores, but gateways to doom. Disease, sin, and maybe a ghost or two, depending on who you asked. It didn't help that physicians, blessed their pre-microscope hearts, swore that hot water drew illness in a body like a sponge sucks up soup. You pause near a baker's window. The warmth from the oven is delicious, but someone nearby coughs. A wet, phlegmy thing that echoes with medieval dread. You back away slowly. That fear? That's what closed the bathhouses. That, and the church. At first, these places were almost sacred. Cleanliness and piety went hand in hand. Monasteries, in particular, held on to Roman bathing traditions longer than most. But somewhere along the centuries, a new idea took hold. That to bathe was to tempt the devil. Because where there's steam, there's sin. Imagine this. You're naked in warm water with other people. There's music, maybe wine, maybe laughter. Is that your conscience tapping your shoulder, or just someone else's foot under the water? Either way, it didn't take long for church leaders to start side-eyeing bathhouses. If confession lines got longer after bath night, maybe it wasn't the lavender water causing so many sins. Soon, public tubs were seen less as hygiene hubs and more like bubbling cauldrons of temptation. And when the Black Death showed up, clawing through cities like a panicked horse through a market stall, people were more than ready to slam the bathhouse doors shut forever. After all, if plague gets in through your pores and bathing opens your pores, then logic, medieval logic, that is, says hot baths are death traps. So people adjusted. They stopped washing their whole bodies. They started believing that staying dry was safer, cleaner, holier, and yet, they didn't stop caring about how they smelled. You pass a young woman plucking rosemary from a window box. She rubs it between her fingers and braids it in her hair, not for style, but to keep the smell of the street at bay. Scent was armor, linen sachets stuffed with lavender, herbal oils dabbed under sleeves, musk if you were rich, garlic if you were broke. Everyone wore their own scent bubble, portable little zones of denial. The irony is thick as the grime under a merchant's fingernails. Roman bathhouses had once been status symbols, architectural marvels with heated floors and mosaics. Now, even drawing a bath was suspect. In fact, the more modest you appeared, the more layers you wore. The less flesh you showed, the closer you seemed to God. And let's be honest, stripping down in front of your neighbor, even with a bucket of rosemary water between you, was a quick way to start rumors. You pass a group of boys huddled around a well, washing only their hands and faces. It's a common ritual. Full-body immersion might be taboo, but a quick rinse of the visible parts still counts. You notice they each have a strip of cloth, rough, slightly damp, maybe dipped in vinegar or some herbal rinse. The medieval sponge bath. Except no sponge, just dabbing. A ritual of modest cleanliness. There's a strange pride here. People who wouldn't dare soak their entire body still make a show of washing their hands. A clean face could suggest health. Piety. Well, it was a performance of virtue, even when the rest of you itched like a hay bale full of fleas. And speaking of fleas, oh, don't worry. You'll meet them soon enough. You walk past what used to be a bathhouse. Now, it's a bakery. The heat from the oven faintly masking the scent of decay beneath the floorboards where water once flowed. Some of these places were simply abandoned. Others, repurposed. At least one was turned into a courthouse, because if you're not going to scrub your sins away, you might as well sentence someone for theirs. Here's the twist, though. Bathing hadn't always been terrifying. In the early Middle Ages, it was normal, even fashionable. Cleanliness, once upon a time, meant virtue. Monks bathed regularly. Nobles had attendants lugged boiling water to their chambers. Peasants dunked themselves in rivers during warm weather, not because they were vain, but because nobody likes to smell like spoiled turnips if they don't have to. But that window closed. And here's where historians squabble like hens near a spilled grain sack. Some argue that the fall of public hygiene had more to do with shifting infrastructure, Roman aqueduct crumbling, sanitation systems fading, than fear or faith. Others insist it was purely religious backlash, a war on temptation in liquid form. A few even suggest that it was economic. Maintaining public bathhouses got expensive, and when funds ran dry, so did everyone else. Whatever the reason, you're here now, in a world where bathing means suspicion, herbal perfume is a necessity, and cleanliness is next to, well, not quite godliness. Maybe next to piety, or paranoia, or perhaps just a really good linen shirt. As the sun dips behind crooked chimneys and the cobblestones sweat with evening mist, you feel the weight of the day settle into your skin. You haven't bathed, but no one else has either. And in this world, that's just how it's done. You follow the scent of old steam and faint rosemary, trailing deeper into the town's winding heart. Cobblestones grow slick underfoot, the air damp and heavy with stories. Somewhere beyond the crooked chimney stacks and sagging shutters, something used to bubble, something communal and scandalous. You pause before a small, soot-streaked building. A faded mural above the door shows a woman in a wooden tub, her arms raised like she's mid-toast or mid-gossip. It's one of the few remaining bathhouses not completely abandoned, though barely. The sign above it dangles like a tired foot from high window, its iron hook rusting, its hinges groaning. Once, bathhouses like this were the warm, wet hearts of the city. You step inside, or rather, into the memory of it. The room greets you with damp silence and a smell of wood smoke, time, and long-faded sins. The benches are splintered. The cauldron used to heat water lies cold. But in your mind, it's alive again. Picture it. Steam rising, voices mingling, water sloshing, laughter echoing off tiled walls. It's noisy, intimate, and just a little chaotic. Men and women bathe together. Yes, you heard that right. Especially in Southern Europe, where bathhouses were more relaxed about who saw what. Not everywhere and not always, but often enough that scandal wrote itself faster than any scribe. In Germany, Italy, and even parts of France, mixed bathing was normal, at least for a time. You imagine the scene. Merchants dropping in after a long day at market, their coin purses as weary as their feet. A pair of monks, half bald and half submerged, debating theology between ladles of hot water. A noble couple, languidly soaking side by side, her hair braided with marjoram, his eyes scanning the room for someone more interesting. Candles flicker in wall sconces. Musicians strum. Wine is served. It feels less like hygiene and more like a Roman banquet in a bathtub. And that's kind of the point. These places weren't just about washing. They were about socializing, about being seen. Gossip bubbled alongside bathwater. Friendships were forged, flirtations floated, and business was whispered between rinses. It was a stew of humanity, sometimes literally, depending on how often they changed the water. But boundaries blurred, and that's when things got steamy in the worst way. As the bathhouses flourished, so too did their extracurriculars. Some began to offer additional services. And no, it wasn't just massages. certain bathhouse attendants became suspiciously friendly. The line between wellness and wantonness thinned like a worn linen shift. The water got cloudy, and so did reputations. You lift a dusty wooden ladle from the bath's edge. It's smooth from hundreds of hands. Once, someone used it to pour hot water over aching shoulders. Then maybe over someone else's shoulders. Then maybe over someone else's lap. The church noticed, and they were not amused. Clerics started preaching fire and vinegar about the bathhouses. Too much flesh, too much temptation, too much mixing of bodies, and heaven forbid, classes. A peasant in a tub with a noblewoman? Si gang dang. A monk with a merchant's wife? Double scandal. A musician tuning his lute while someone else loosened theirs? Absolutely not. So they cracked down. Across Europe, bathhouses were shuttered or reformed, which in practice meant turned into bakeries, granaries, and in one ironic case, a monastery. The water stopped running, but the rumors did not. Even in places where bathhouses remained, they had to operate more discreetly. Candles dimmed, services trimmed, but the whisper of heat and scandal lingered. And then came the plague, when the Black Death stormed across Europe like a cold wind through an open wound. Bathhouses became easy scapegoats. After all, if disease crept in through pores, and warm water opened pores, then a hot soak was basically an engraved invitation to the Grim Reaper. Doctors, cloaked in beak-like masks, brandishing leeches and confidence, warned against bathing. They said it weakened the body's natural defenses, that it let the bad air in, that it encouraged immoral thoughts, as if sin had an easier time finding you when you were damp and relaxed. It didn't matter that the bathhouses were likely cleaner than most streets, or that the real problem was fleas riding rats like tiny, doomed cowboys. What mattered was fear, and fear closed more doors than disease ever could. You crouched beside a drain at the center of the room. Once water swirled here, carrying sweat, perfume, and secrets out to the street beyond. Now, it's just a hole in a dry floor. A relic of a time when soaking with strangers didn't mean scandal. It meant community. And yet, the debate still simmers among historians like a pot left on low heat. Some say bathhouses were always doomed. Too luxurious, too indulgent, too vulnerable to gossip. Others argue their downfall was purely medical, a tragic misunderstanding of hygiene. And a third camp insists it was all about politics and economics. Maintaining clean public spaces was expensive, especially when nobody wanted to touch the water anymore, literally or administratively. One thing's clear, though. For a time, bathhouses were the great equalizers. Nobles, peasants, monks, and merchants, all naked and half-steamed, breathing the same scented air. A brief moment when hygiene, hilarity, and humanity soaked side by side. You trace a hand along the edge of the empty tub. The wood is soft, water-warped. Maybe someone once carved their initials here, hoping to return next week. Maybe they never did. Maybe the bathhouse closed that same year. Outside, the bells toll. A market is ending. A curfew begins, and the cold presses in like a damp wool blanket. You pull your cloak tighter and glance back at the empty bath one last time. It's just an old room. Damp, quiet, forgotten. But not by you, because now you know, before the plague, before the panic, there were places where steam and sin danced together, where people soaked away the soot of the streets, even if they risked a little gossip and a lot of judgment. And honestly, compared to what comes next, lice, laundry, and chamber pots, it doesn't seem so bad. Your boots leave the crumbling bathhouse behind, the last of its steam long gone cold. As you pass under a low arch where moss curls up the stone like lazy fingers, the temperature drops. And so does your optimism, because now you're in the age of dry hygiene, a world where staying clean means not getting wet. It starts with a feeling, a light itch behind your ear, then one along your shoulder. And before you can even ask yourself whether it's psychological, you're scratching like you've been rolling in straw with a family of hedgehogs. Welcome to medieval cleanliness, version 2, the dab and pray method. You find a woman standing in the doorway of her cottage, wringing out a square of linen. It drips slowly into a wooden basin filled with cloudy, herbal-smelling water. She isn't preparing to bathe. Don't be ridiculous. She's preparing to press. Face, armpits, hands, feet. Only the high-traffic areas. Everything else stays resolutely dry. She's careful, precise. Her cloth smells of rosemary and vinegar, and she wipes with the focus of someone avoiding both illness and excommunication. This, you realize, is the height of personal hygiene for most people now. A full-body bath is a myth, a danger, a temptation. But a warm cloth, dabbed carefully behind the ears and under the arms, that's modest, holy, practically virtuous. People say that too much water weakens the body, that steam invites spirits, that the devil loves a damp backside. You step into a tavern, not for ale but warmth, and perhaps to see how the townsfolk stay clean without ever getting wet. The man behind the bar smells faintly of lavender. His linen shirt is tidy, if yellowed, and his hands, though calloused, show signs of frequent rinsing. He's doing his best, like everyone else. That's the key here. It's not laziness. It's strategy. People in the late Middle Ages aren't ignoring hygiene. They're just following a new logic. Water is risky. Steam is seductive. And soap. Well, we'll get to soap later. But for now, you learn the basics of dry maintenance. Dab yourself with a cloth soaked in rose water. Sprinkle your undershirt with mint. Chew cloves to sweeten your breath. Wash your linen, not your limbs. And wear layers. Lots and lots of layers. You wander past a boy hanging shirts on a line. They flap like tired ghosts. Stiff from the wind, but freshly laundered. That's the trick you overhear. A clean shirt equals a clean person. You might stink under 4 layers of wool, but if your linen shift is snowy white, congratulations, you are officially washed. You're starting to understand the rhythm. A routine dictated more by suspicion than science. Fewer baths, but more brushing. Fewer scrubs, more scraping. Combs are prized. Herbs are hoarded. Linen is everything. You duck into the shadow of a monastery wall, following the distant sound of chanting. A monk appears, his head tonsured, his robe loose and clean. You'd think they at least would live in squalor. But monastic hygiene is surprisingly decent. Not luxurious, but disciplined. Some orders, especially the stricter Benedictines, mandate scheduled washings. Hands before meals. Feet weekly. Hair occasionally. A full bath, maybe once a month, or during special holy periods. And it's not just about cleanliness, it's about ritual. Washing before prayer. Purifying before reflection. Holiness, after all, smells better when you're not covered in goat grease. Still, even monks are adapting to the times. Many abbeys have shuttered their bathhouses. Too expensive, too tempting, too scandalous. What remains are wash basins, communal cloths, and a whole lot of vinegar. You stop beside a young novice rinsing cloths in a bowl. He looks up, smiles politely, then returns to scrubbing. The water smells of time and a bit of fear. He's doing penance, you realize. But it's not a punishment, it's practice. Cleanliness, in this world, is a discipline, not an indulgence. Back outside, you pass a row of houses where windows are open, airing out stale rooms. Herbs hang from lintels, lavender, sage, marjoram, all drying in bunches. They're not just for cooking, they're for cleaning. 2, for hiding the scent of sweat and livestock. For stuffing into pillows, shirts, even shoes. You catch the tang of mint and marigold as you pass, sharp and hopeful. A child runs by with a pouch around their neck. A pomander, you realize, a tiny ball filled with spices and dried flowers. It swings like a pendant, like a little personal breeze of not quite awful. It's both a charm against disease and a medieval air freshener. 2 birds, 1 fragrant stone. Then the town crier walks past, ringing his bell and shouting something about curfew. You step back into the shadows and spot the old midwife. She's preparing for a birth, carrying a bucket of warm water and herbs. For this, and only this, a bath is permitted. New life, they say, deserves rosemary water and a quick scrub before facing the rest of this medieval world. There's debate. even among midwives and monks, about when a bath is worth the risk. Some insist it's essential after illness or childbirth. Others argue that washing a sick body invites death to finish the job. Scholars, too, bicker quietly in manuscripts. Was Galen right about the four humors? Is heat really the enemy? Is moisture a moral failing or a medical one? You pass a woman whispering prayers over a cloth before dipping it into water. Superstition and sanitation are inseparable now. There's no concept of germs, but there's a deep belief in balance, in spirits, in air quality, and in the unseen. The body is a vessel, the soul, a tenant. Water might wash one, but could dislodge the other. You make your way back toward the main street. The sun is beginning to set. Smoke curls up from chimneys. Somewhere, a cow lowing sounds strangely resigned. You're layered in dust and the faint perfume of other people's opinions on hygiene. And yet, you've survived the day. You haven't fainted from the stink. You haven't drowned in a bathhouse or been accused of sin for dabbing your neck with mint. You're learning. You're adapting, just like they did. You brush your sleeve and wonder if this counts as cleaning. In this world, it just might. The scent of boiling water seeps from behind a carved wooden door. You follow it, not because you're cold, but because you're curious. Something is different here. You hear servants' voices, the soft clang of copper pots, the faint rustle of linen being laid out like a royal offering. Someone important is about to take a bath. You step inside quietly, peering around a wide chamber glowing with firelight. A large wooden tub sits at the center, lined with cream-colored cloth and sprinkled with herbs, lavender, sage. Even a few rose petals floating lazily like bored nobles. Steam swirls from its surface, and in the background, a young man carries in another bucket of boiling water, careful not to spill a drop. This is a noblewoman's bath, and it's as much theater as hygiene. She sits in a robe near the hearth, waiting for the temperature to be just right, lukewarm, not hot. Too hot opens the pores. After all, we've covered that. Too cold invites illness. Lukewarm is the golden middle ground, the compromise between science, superstition, and the vague desire not to shiver during your once-a-month scrub. She steps in with the hesitance of someone used to being clothed in wool and pride, not damp linen and vulnerability. The cloth protects her from splinters, from touching the same wood where others have sat, and, if she's lucky, from reality. For the next half hour, she is suspended in a tepid herbal broth, equal parts soup and ceremony. An attendant kneels beside her, pouring a rinse down her back. She closes her eyes, lets the water cascade in silence. The rinse is rosemary and vinegar, meant to refresh, cleanse, and repel fleas, though not necessarily all at once. Bathing like this is a luxury, a ritual, and, in some cases, a rare moment of privacy, though that last part depends heavily on one's rank. Privacy, as it turns out, is a sliding scale in the medieval world. If you're the queen, you might bathe behind a silk curtain while three maids scrub your arms like holy relics. If you're a merchant's wife, you might sit in a shared tub in the corner of the kitchen. Modesty preserved by nothing more than timing and a firmly locked door. And if you're very lucky and very married, you might share your bath with your husband, floating together like fragrant dumplings in marital broth. Yes, medieval people did that. A warm bath was intimate, sensual, and occasionally romantic. Shared baths were common among couples who could afford the water, the wood, and the downtime. Imagine whispering to your beloved over a thin film of rosemary oil while your servants politely pretended not to listen. But let's be clear, this wasn't a daily indulgence. Not even weekly. A noble bath happened maybe once a month, twice if you were recovering from childbirth or had just buried a cousin and were feeling especially generous with yourself. Soap was sometimes used, though it wasn't the bubbly, lavender-scented bar you might imagine. It was more like rubbing lard and ashes into your skin and pretending it smelled like progress. Still, among the elite, the full-body bath held its place. It was a sign of wealth, of health, and of having enough servants to make it someone else's problem. You didn't fetch your own water, after all. You had people for that. You didn't boil it. You didn't carry it. You didn't even test the temperature. You simply sat, sighed, and tried not to look smug while the rest of the village smelled like damp goats and regret. And what about after? Well, drying off was a whole production. Thick linen towels, rare, bleached, and well-maintained, were brought out and gently patted over the skin, careful not to rub too hard lest the devil be jostled from the pores. Then came oils if you were rich, a dab behind the ears, a whisper along the wrists, something floral perhaps, something imported if you were especially indulgent. And just like that, the bath ended. You step back as the noblewoman emerges, wrapped in layers again, her hair damp but composed. Her attendant gathers the cloth, dumps the water into a side drain, and begins preparing the next rinse for the linens, not the lady. Because remember, in this world, you clean the cloth more often than the skin. But here's the twist. Not all nobles bathed. Some, in fact, prided themselves on dry cleanliness, using only dry rubs and scented cloths. There's a famous anecdote, though historians debate its accuracy, about a queen who was said to bathe twice in her life, once at birth and once before her wedding. The story might be apocryphal or just exaggerated by jealous courtiers with poor olfactory tolerance. Still, it reveals the truth. Among the wealthy, bathing was sometimes less about sanitation and more about signaling. Signal your piety, your restraint, your separation from the sweaty masses. The less you smelled like rosemary soup, the more divine you appeared. You leave the manor house quietly, returning to the streets where your boots pick up the grit of everyday folk. Around the corner, a chimney smokes, and through the open shutters, you catch sight of a much different scene. A peasant woman pouring water into a barrel. Her children splash half-heartedly nearby, their elbows muddy, their feet already stained again by the yard. This is their bath. A barrel, some herbs, maybe a sliver of soap if it was a prosperous week. She scoops water over the smallest child, muttering something soft, rhythmic, half lullaby, half instruction. This isn't luxury. This is practicality. Washing the kid, the shirt, and the dog all in one go. Because firewood is expensive, and warmth is fleeting. Here, bathing is efficient. It's not about piety or performance. It's about not freezing, not stinking, not losing your dignity entirely. Sometimes, it's just a matter of timing the bath before the water cools and the fire dies. The contrast is sharp. In one room, a noblewoman floats in scented linen. In another, a child giggles in a half-full barrel while a dog sneezes in the corner. Both are bathing. Both are trying. Both are in their own way surviving. You move through the streets with a new respect for water, for warmth, for the act of cleaning oneself in a world where it's never just about dirt. And you can't help but think, for something so feared, bathing remains incredibly human. Your fingers trace the rim of a wooden bucket as you pass a row of cottages. The water inside is tepid, cloudy, and has the faint scent of rosemary. Or is that yesterday's cabbage? It's hard to tell. Someone's already used it to wash something or someone. Probably both. You peer through an open doorway and see what can only be described as a multitasking miracle. A woman is scrubbing her daughter's feet while wringing out laundry, and behind her, a goat, tethered loosely to a stool, chews contentedly on someone's clean undergarment. This, apparently, is peak hygiene for the working class. And you know what? It kind of works. For peasants, time, firewood, and clean water are precious. So when something's wet, everything gets wet. You bathe the child, the shirt, and the goat in one go. Not out of laziness, but out of survival-level efficiency. It's the medieval version of a 3-in-1 shampoo, conditioner, body wash. Except it's water, lie, and hope. You duck your head into the cottage as the woman glances up and gives a half-smile. Polite, tired, and stained with wood smoke. She holds up a bar of soap, rough and grayish, as though it were some magical relic. This is her prized possession, homemade, boiled down from animal fat and wood ash, cooled in a shallow mold, and cut with a knife that's done far too many other jobs. She demonstrates its use with the care of someone handling a potion. A little rub on a cloth, a brisk scrub on the arms or behind the ears, Then rinse if there's water to spare. If not, well, you make do. You always make do. You watch her continue the process. The cloth is everything. Reusable, washable. Far easier to replace than the skin it scrubs. There's no bath here, no tub, no perfumed rinse. Just rhythm, effort, and a little warmth rising from the hearth. The concept of being clean is flexible. It's more about appearing clean, about not looking completely disheveled, about masking odors with herbs, or just staying downwind from important people. You step back outside and into the narrow lane that cuts between a pigsty and a dung heap, and yes, the scent confirms it's very much both. But that's the thing, you're not above the smells. No one is. Even the wealthiest have to walk through streets like this. There are no sewage systems to whisk the grime away, no city pipes to sanitize daily sins. What there is, though, is linen, and the illusion that changing it regularly is as good as a bath. Linen, in this world, is sacred. Clean linen means you're clean. It wicks away sweat. It touches your body before the wool does. And it absorbs, well, everything. You see someone beating a linen shirt against a rock by the stream, watching the brown streaks vanish in the current like bad memories. Another person brushes lint from their chemise with fastidious devotion. They won't bathe, but by God, they'll wear a shirt so white it blinds the chickens. The logic is simple. If your linen is clean, you're clean. Even if what's under the linen hasn't touched water since the last coronation. And honestly, you're starting to get it. A merchant strolls by, smelling faintly of cloves and ox sweat, his tunic pristine and his hair combed back with what might be bacon grease. He lifts a perfumed cloth to his nose as he passes the sty. Try to keep the illusion alive. You see it on his face, the grim resolve of a man pretending he smells like nothing at all. This illusion of cleanliness isn't unique to peasants. It's universal. Everyone in town is part of the same theatrical production. I'm clean enough, aren't I? The performance changes slightly depending on the audience. If you're meeting the priest, add extra rosemary. If you're going to market, change your apron. If you're visiting the castle, well, try not to breathe too deeply and walk confidently. Nobles smell fear. You follow the scent of soap. Not the good kind, but the kind that smells like burned toast and wet dog. A group of washerwomen are gathered by a muddy riverbank, sleeves rolled, arms working in unison. The pounding of paddles on wet cloth echoes like a drumbeat of domestic war. They're scrubbing tunics, shirts, and possibly curses from existence. You approach, and one woman, her hair tied in a filthy ribbon, glances up. You looking for something clean or something dry? She jokes, then slaps a pair of breeches against the rock with a noise like vengeance. They're half laughing, half exhausted, and 100% getting things done. Because here's a truth rarely sung in troubadour ballads. The unsung heroes of medieval hygiene are women with buckets, basins, and strong forearms. They haul water, they boil linens, they stir soap vats with spoons longer than a bishop's sermon. They preserve what shred of freshness their homes can afford. And if they happen to wash a child's face with the same cloth they used on the dog, well, that's just efficiency. You sit for a moment by the stream, watching suds drift downstream like little hope bubbles. You wonder if they had any idea how dirt and disease truly worked. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Germ theory is centuries away. What they do believe in, though, is balance. Of humors, of temperature, of air. Too much washing disrupts the balance. Too little risks public shame. Everyone walks this tightrope, and linen is their balancing pole. There's a scholarly debate, of course there is, about just how often people actually did wash. Some say the image of the dirty. Stinking medieval peasant is an exaggeration dreamed up by Victorian historians with superiority complexes and better plumbing. Others insist that yes, it was that bad, and that we're lucky not to have preserved the smell in the archives. The truth, predictably, is somewhere in the middle. They weren't filthy because they didn't care. They were filthy because life was filthy. Because water was dangerous, warmth was rare, and time was a luxury. And even still, they fought it with rags. With vinegar, with combs, with linen, and with sheer stubborn human pride. As twilight settles, you stand again, Your cloak slightly more wrinkled than this morning. Your boots now decorated with the memory of every puddle you crossed. And yet, you feel a little cleaner. Because in this town, being clean isn't about being pristine. It's about trying. And somehow, in that trying, there's a strange kind of grace. A soft wind ruffles the back of your neck as you pass a crooked wooden sign painted with what else, a comb. It creaks gently on its hook above a stall set against a crumbling stone wall. On a small table sits a collection of personal care treasures. Bone-handled combs, little vials of oil, and a few lumps of pale, suspiciously grayish soap. A faded cloth banner flutters behind them, embroidered with words you can barely read. For lice, for life, for love. You're entering the realm of medieval hair care. And yes, you should be nervous. A woman stands behind the stall, her hair wrapped in a fraying linen scarf. She offers you a cracked tooth smile and gestures to a basin of murky water where someone's just dipped a comb. You sit, half curious, and she begins to explain, with great pride, how to keep your hair healthy and vaguely less terrifying in these times. First, you must oil it. Animal fat, sometimes egg yolk if you're lucky, a splash of wine or ale for fragrance. She applies a little to her own hair, long, thick, and stiff like old rope, and runs a wooden comb through it with careful force. Keeps the lice off, she says. Sometimes, 'cause there is again. You've heard the scratching. You've seen the combs. And now you understand. Hair isn't just a matter of fashion in the medieval world. It's a battlefield. And you're vastly outnumbered. You stroll onward, passing a man seated by the fire, carefully running a comb through his beard. Each stroke is deliberate, each pause filled with inspection. He pinches something from the comb's teeth and flicks it into the flames, where it crackles like a grim little firework. You try not to ask. You already know. Lice are everywhere. In hair, on skin. Burrowed in seams, hiding in hats. Rich or poor, male or female, no one escapes them entirely. There are, however, strategies. Comb often. Roast your clothes. And for the particularly infested, shave it all off and hope for the best. You spot a monk nearby, bald save for his tonsure. His scalp shines in the afternoon light. Part of you wonders if his haircut is spiritual or tactical. Tonsure does, after all, reduce the real estate available for pests. Then there's the soap. You'd think it would help, but it's not that simple. Most soaps are homemade from boiled fat and ashes, scented with whatever's available. Lavender if you're lucky, onions if you're not. Some add lye for extra cleaning power, which works wonderfully until your scalp feels like it's been sanded with regret. A woman stirs a pot near her door, peering into it with equal parts hope and resignation. She drops in a chunk of animal fat, then throws in rosemary, a strip of lice stone, and something that might once have been a lemon. She's making shampoo, or something like it. You see her dunk a length of her daughter's hair in the cooled mixture later, fingers working the paste through with determined scrubbing. The child wails. The mother doesn't flinch. Hair care is not a gentle business here. You pass a tavern where a girl is combing her brother's hair outside the door. She's humming, swaying slightly with each stroke. He winces, then sighs, then winces again. When she's done, she pulls out a little pouch and rubs rosemary oil into his scalp. Keeps it sweet, she mutters. Gapes, wait. Whether she means lice or girls is unclear. The scholarly world debates a lot about medieval cleanliness, but nowhere is it more muddled than in the question of hair. Did people wash it regularly? Did they care? Some sources suggest that nobles perfumed their locks daily. Others insist they only oiled and combed, preferring to smell like well-aged cheese rather than risk wetting their heads. One medical tract says washing hair more than once a month will invite madness. Another recommends washing with ash and goose grease every Tuesday. A third source, written in the margins of a manuscript, simply says, smell is nothing to God. You pause at a mirror, a polished brass plate nailed to a wall, and see your reflection. Your hair is limp, matted, wind-tangled, and lightly salted by the road. A little rosemary wouldn't hurt, but there's no time to worry about vanity now, because the lice aren't your only concern. You pass a woman with her head covered, not by choice but necessity. Her scalp was shaved last week after an outbreak. Her husband walks beside her, equally bald. They nod as they pass, a quiet kind of solidarity. In another village, this might be shameful. Here, it's survival. And what about styling? Oh, they have that too. Among the rich, hair is sculpted into elaborate braids and tucked under veils, pennons, and caps. Among the poor, it's braided tightly to keep it clean or hacked short to keep it manageable. Wigs exist, but only for the wealthy. Hair dye, rare but not unheard of. Henna, walnuts, soot, the usual suspects. There's even one nobleman, long dead, long gossiped about, who insisted on rinsing his hair in white wine daily. Did it make a difference? Perhaps in scent, perhaps in swagger, but no rinse, no oil. No lye-heavy shampoo can keep lice at bay forever. So they comb, and roast their clothes over fire, and scratch in secret. You stop beside a fire pit where someone's laid out a set of garments. A woman uses a stick to lift a tunic just over the flames. Roasting him, she says casually, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. Bugs don't like heat. Neither does the smell. She grins. Her sleeves are rolled high, her hands blackened with ash. You smile back, unsure where to sit. There's no clean surface. And still, despite all this, there's pride. People care how they look. They pluck stray hairs with heated tweezers. They shape their beards. They tuck rosemary sprigs into caps and dab their wrists with crushed flowers. They try, even when nature and biology stack the odds against them. As the sun dips below the thatched rooftops and the wind shifts, carrying the scent of smoke, sweat, and minty desperation, you realize something. This world doesn't define cleanliness by modern standards. It defines it by effort, by ritual, by resistance. Hair care here is not luxury. It is defense. And in this battle of scalp versus parasite, everyone's fighting the good fight. The scent of salt and crushed mint wafts past as you enter a quiet courtyard where a man sits cross-legged on a stool, holding what looks like a twig in his mouth. But as you step closer, you see it's not just a twig. It's a tooth-cleaning tool, stripped at the end, chewed into a bristle. A medieval toothbrush. He nods politely, still gnawing, as he gestures toward a small wooden box at his side. Inside it, crushed charcoal, salt crystals, dried mint leaves, and powdered deer bone. He dabs the twig into the mixture and continues scrubbing his teeth like a knight polishing his armor. Gritty, determined, and a little painful to watch. In the absence of fluoride, toothbrushes, or minty fresh promises, medieval oral care is inventive and mildly alarming. You sit on a bench nearby as a second man leans into the sunlight, pulling back his lips to inspect a molar with a bronze mirror no bigger than a coin. His teeth are mostly intact, yellowed but present. He dips a cloth into wine vinegar and gives them a wipe, not to whiten them, but to kill whatever he assumes is causing the ache behind his gums. For all the dirt and danger, medieval people did care about their teeth. In fact, there are more surviving recipes for mouthwashes and tooth powders than for some basic foodstuffs. Why? Because teeth mattered. Bad breath was offensive. Rotten teeth could kill. And a nice smile? Still a winning move, even in the 13th century. You lean against a sun-warmed wall as a mother teaches her child how to clean his mouth with a green twig. She tells him to chew the end until it's soft, then rub it gently over his teeth. She reminds him to spit away from the goat, not at it, and the boy nods solemnly. Hygiene and manners, all in one lesson. Nearby, a midwife explains her version of tooth powder. Equal parts sage, salt, powdered oyster shell, and mint. If you can't chew sage, chew parsley. If you don't have parsley, chew fennel. If you don't have any of that, well, hope for good genetics and pray you die of something else first. You walk along a street where vendors offer clove oil for toothaches. It numbs slightly, enough to dull the pain, though not enough to fool anyone into thinking you're healthy. Next to it, a small pouch of honey and onion paste meant to soothe swollen gums. You're told it also works for boils and marital arguments. A miracle cure, clearly. Still, it wasn't all herbal optimism. There's an apothecary tucked in a corner stall who whispers of tooth drawers. Men with steady hands, terrifying tools, and the emotional range of a pickaxe. They don't clean teeth, they remove them. If you're rich, they use silver instruments. If you're poor, it's iron. If you're desperate, it's anything on hand, including pliers, a boot heel, or in one chilling story, a blacksmith's tongs. You shudder at the thought and quickly pivot back to daily routines. Most people, peasants and nobles alike, start and end their day with some kind of mouth rinse. Vinegar and water is popular. So is wine, especially among the upper class. Bread crusts are used like dental floss, and chewing sticks serve triple duty as tooth cleaners, breath fresheners, and absent-minded snacks. You overhear two women at a well talking about a local priest who fasts every Friday and swishes holy water for oral purification. It keeps the devil out of the mouth, one says. Her friend laughs. And yet he still preaches too long. That's the thing. There's a ritualistic component to all of this. Clean teeth are connected to virtue. A tidy mouth suggests discipline. Some even believe bad breath is a sign of inner rot, a soul rotting alongside the gums. So people hide it. They chew cloves during confession. They smear mint oil before communion. They whisper through herbal poultices and dried lemon peels, desperate not to offend angels with onion breath. You pause at a small shrine where someone has left a bundle of myrrh and rosemary, tucked beside a clay statue of Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dentistry, often shown holding her own molar with pincers. Her story? She had all her teeth pulled by Romans and was later canonized by people who clearly understood suffering. And while it's tempting to laugh, there's a quiet respect in it. Even in a world where baths are rare and lice are constant, the mouth remains a sacred space, a vessel for prayer, for speech, for song. A young man sits beside the road, strumming a lute. Between verses, he wipes his teeth with a cloth soaked in wine. He smiles between chords, and while his teeth aren't straight or bright, they're clean enough. Passable, presentable, in this world. That's more than good. That's survival. But let's not romanticize it entirely. Medieval dentistry isn't painless. If your tooth aches, you endure. If it swells, you pray. If it blackens, you find a brave neighbor or a particularly strong barmaid with a steady grip. In a world without anesthesia, the bravest person in the village isn't the knight. It's the person holding still while someone yanks out their molar with a stick and a prayer. The scholarly debate rages quietly. Some believe oral health in the Middle Ages was actually better than it is today. Less sugar, fewer processed foods. Others argue that any benefit was offset by accidents, infections, and the complete lack of toothbrushes. Both are right in parts. But one thing's certain, they tried. They tried with salt, ash, vinegar, sage, and sticks. They tried with boiled wine and poultices. They tried with what they had. As the sky shifts from gold to gray, and the street lamps, tiny oil-soaked ropes in clay bowls, are lit one by one, you feel the weight of the day in your jaw. Maybe it's all the observation. Maybe it's sympathy pain. Or maybe it's the mental image of a tooth drawer with hands like fence posts and a hammer in his apron. Either way, you find yourself chewing a bit of parsley as you walk. It's not many, but it's enough. By now, you've accepted it. The medieval world has a smell. It's a mix of damp wool, scorched tallow, stale ale, and something you can only describe as communal. And yet, despite this olfactory onslaught, people try. Oh, they try? You wander through a narrow alley, where laundry sways from windows like limp flags of surrender. A woman leans from one sill and tosses a bundle of herbs down to a girl waiting below. "For your sleeves," she calls. The girl catches it with a practiced hand and disappears into the shadows. You follow at a distance. She stops beside a stone bench and begins untying the bundle. Rosemary, lavender, dried rose petals, crushed together and sewn into little cloth packets no bigger than a walnut. She tucks one under each arm, another into her bodice, and finally one in her hood. Medieval deodorant, in its purest form, scent-masking sachets of hope. People here don't fight odor with chemicals. They camouflage it. Disguise it. Turn it into something else. It's not about not smelling. It's about smelling like the right things. Like time and piety. Like marjoram and modesty. Like you haven't spent the day wrestling sheep and stewing onions. You pass a man in a felt hat who lifts his cloak slightly as he walks by a dung cart. Underneath, the unmistakable whiff of juniper and lemon balm. Subtle, but strategic. He adjusts his step to stay upwind. You admire the choreography. In this world, people were sent like armor. At market, a vendor sells little ceramic balls with pierced holes, pomanders. Inside, a blend of cloves, cinnamon, and whatever else could be scrounged from trade routes and prayers. The rich dangle them from belts or necklaces, their presence both protective and performative. A noble woman brushes past, her pomander swinging like a pendulum of judgment, part perfume, part fashion, part medieval bug repellent. For those less wealthy, there are simpler tricks. A sprig of mint in the hair, bay leaves crushed into boots, or just rubbing your palms with vinegar and dried orange peel before shaking hands. Smells like you bathed, they'll say. That's the highest compliment you can get around here. You pause near a church where incense drifts out through the open door. Frankincense, thick and golden, trying valiantly to smother the smell of wet wool and pilgrim breath. A priest waves the censer with rhythmic patience, and you wonder how much of this is ritual and how much is olfactory to tree of. A boy nearby explains the trick of incense-covered cuffs. You wave them when someone smells bad, he says, and demonstrates with flourish. You laugh, but he's serious. Sensor signals. Offensive body odor might indicate illness or poverty or moral weakness. Smelling good is more than pleasant. It's protective. You pass another vendor. This one's selling a strange paste in tiny clay pots. To dab on your neck, she insists. Lavender and lard. She winks. Keeps the fleas off your lover, too. You buy a sample, though you're not entirely sure why. And here comes the debate. Did medieval people really smell as bad as we think? Some historians argue we exaggerate, that strong odors were normalized, that we impose modern expectations on a world without running water and aluminum-based antiperspirants. Others insist it was truly unbearable, especially during warm months, feast days, or livestock auctions. There are letters, actual letters, written by travelers describing the dense human fog of certain cities. And yet, these same cities have perfumeries, herbalists, and entire professions dedicated to masking, managing, and monetizing scent. Because yes, medieval people cared. Not always in the same ways, but they did. No one wants to stink. Not in the 1300s. Not now. You pass a group of young girls braiding dried lavender into each other's hair. One of them sings a tune about warding off death and flies with elderflower. Another rubs her neck with a damp cloth soaked in rose water. It's gentle, ritualistic. There's something sacred in the care. Even servants, who rarely had the time or water for full body rinses, found ways. A swipe of the armpits with a vinegar rag. An herbal rinse poured into the collar. Some even stuffed moss into shoes to absorb the worst of foot odor. Not ideal, but clever. You approach a baker who sprinkles rosemary under his work table. Not for flavor, but to mask the scent of yeast, sweat, and whatever the apprentice stepped in that morning. He shrugs. You get used to it, he says. Then, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. And that's the essence of it. They couldn't eliminate odors, but they could layer them, outmaneuver them, trick the senses, even if only briefly. One smell folded over another. Camphor over wool, sage over shoes, juniper under arms. Like adding spices to stew that's maybe gone a bit wrong, but still fills the belly. Even the court had its rituals. Nobles were known to scatter herbs across floors before a banquet, not for decoration, but so guests' feet would crush them and release their scent. Every step, a mini air freshener, a dance of disguise. You sit under a canopy of grapevines as evening descends, watching a group of townsfolk gather. Someone hands out crushed bay, leaves to tuck behind ears. It's casual, ordinary, just something you do before a meal, like wiping your mouth or straightening your belt. In this world, being clean means never giving up the performance. And yes, sometimes the herbs lose. Sometimes the onion breath wins. Sometimes the lavender sachet isn't enough to mask 5 days in the same tunic and a night spent chasing pigs. But the effort is there. And in this place, effort is everything. You breathe deep. The air carries wood smoke, rosemary, and the faint tang of something living, sweating, and trying its very best not to offend. By morning, the linen hangs stiff on its line, frozen slightly at the hem, snapping in the wind like tired flags in a forgotten war. You step into the courtyard, rubbing your arms as a woman unpins a fresh shirt from the wooden pegs. She doesn't look at you. Her focus is on the cloth in her hands, inspecting every seam, holding it to the light like it might confess something. This is sacred. This is linen. In the medieval world, fabric isn't just a fashion statement. It's a moral one. And linen? Linen is virtue, discipline, and maybe just a hint of desperation all stitched into one. You watch her fold the garment with reverence. This shirt, worn under all other layers, never sees the public eye. And yet, it is the most important. It touches the skin. It soaks up sweat. It collects dust, oil, heat, fear, and all the little failings of the flesh. And so, to own more than one linen shirt, that's the dream. That's status. That's almost godliness. There's a saying whispered from washerwoman to bride. Keep your linens clean, and your sins will follow. You smile. You've seen the streets. If that's true, then some souls here are on permanent laundry duty. You trail behind a group of women heading toward the river with their baskets. Their fingers are red and cracked, and yet they laugh, gossiping as they go. The laundry ritual is social, yes, but also brutal. Cold water, heavy cloth, and hours spent bending, slapping, scrubbing, wringing. One woman carries a paddle that could double as a weapon, and she uses it to beat rhythm into a tunic that's seen better decades. And it's not just women. You spot a teenage boy discreetly rinsing his undershirt in a bucket by the well, glancing around like he's hiding contraband. A merchant's apprentice, perhaps, determined not to arrive at the shop smelling like horses and failure. This devotion to linen isn't about vanity, it's about proof. If your visible clothes are layered over something clean, people assume you're clean. If your linen is stained, so are you. If it's bright, pressed, or blessed with even a whisper of lavender, you might just fool the world for a few hours. That's the performance everyone's in on. Look clean, smell decent, survive scrutiny. You wander past a tailor's stall. Bolts of rough-spun fabric lean in bundles against the stone wall. Linen, wool, flax. The tailor mutters, pointing with a needle between his teeth. If it touches skin, it's linen. If it shows in court, it's silk. He squints at you. And if you can afford silk, you can afford servants to wash your linen for you. You continue along the path, passing a cloister where 2 monks are airing out their shifts. Monastic rules vary, but many orders allow 1 clean change per week. The moment is quiet, solemn, almost meditative. You watch one of them inspect the collar for wear. He smooths it, folds it, places it back into a cedar-lined chest. 1 shirt, 1 week, no waste. There's a fringe detail you notice. Noblemen and clergy sometimes had embroidered initials sewn into the inside of their linens. Not for pride, for theft prevention. Laundry was valuable, and losing a shirt was like losing a month's wages. Or worse, your reputation. You hear the clang of bells from the castle tower. Time to dress. Inside the walls, a noble woman prepares for the day. Her servant helps her into a fresh chemise, linen, embroidered soft. It's pulled taut and tied gently at the sleeves. She won't sweat through her outer gown, at least not immediately. And if she does, the linen will catch it, and someone else will wash it. The system works, but for most, there's only 1 shirt. Maybe 2 if you're lucky. And washing day is more than a chore. It's a strategic decision. You need sun, warm weather, a safe place to dry the cloth where it won't be stolen or stepped on. You need time, firewood, soap, and if you don't have those, you do what countless others do. Turn your shirt inside out and pretend it's laundry day. You pass a small boy being inspected by his mother. She lifts his sleeve, sniffs, nods. "One more day," she says and pulls it straight. The boy sighs and dashes back outside. A short reprieve. And here comes the twist. Linen isn't just personal hygiene. It's healthcare. A clean shirt can prevent skin infections, rashes, boils. A fresh cloth can mean the difference between healing and festering. Linen wraps wounds. Linen filters air in masks stuffed with herbs. Linen separates you from the coarseness of wool, from the rub of a leather belt, from the grime of the world. Even scholars have noted that where linen was plentiful, health improved. Not dramatically, but noticeably. It's not magic. It's friction, absorbency, breathability. In short, it's a kind of invisible shield. You find yourself appreciating your own shirt now, even if it's metaphorical. You think of all the hours, all the buckets, all the hands that keep linen moving from body to basin and back again. The unsung liturgy of hygiene, a faith practiced in thread and water. And of course, there's debate. There's always debate. Some historians argue that only the wealthy could manage such routines, that peasants wore the same filthy shirt until it disintegrated. Others counter that even the poorest made linen a priority, stretching it thin, patching it endlessly, treating it like spun gold. The evidence? Letters, inventories, stained fragments preserved in crypts. You pass a tailor's apprentice carefully stitching a patch onto a sleeve, tongue between his teeth. The fabric is thin, nearly translucent. This shirt has survived more winters than its wearer's dog. And yet, it's being saved, repaired, respected, because even a tired, threadbare shirt is better than no shirt at all. As the wind picks up and the sun shifts, you walk beneath lines of drying cloth, flapping quietly, like pages from a forgotten book. Each one tells a story. Each one hides something. Sweat, secrets, survival. And you finally understand why they say, keep your linen clean, and the rest will follow. Your back itches, not politely, not playfully, deeply with intention, like something small and determined is hiking across your spine, possibly dragging a family behind it. You try to ignore it. You fail. A woman nearby is scratching at her elbow with a stick. Elegantly, you might say, if it weren't so desperately. Lice, she mutters to no one in particular. They're worse this season. She tosses the stick into the fire when she's done, as if the flames will judge her less than the neighbors would. You're finally ready to admit what everyone else already knows. The lice situation is bad, and not just lice. Fleas, mites, nits, bedbugs. A whole ecosystem of unwanted house guests lives in the seams of tunics, in the folds of bedding, in the creases behind knees. They don't discriminate. Rich or poor, you're a host. Your hair is real estate. Your warmth, their paradise. Your discomfort? Irrelevant. You walk past a child crouched on the edge of a step, his head tilted forward while his older sister goes through his hair with a fine-toothed comb carved from bone. She works carefully, methodically, her thumb squashing something every few seconds with a faint pop that sends a shiver down your spine. She wipes the comb on a rag. Starts again. There's no shame in it. Everyone has them. Even kings. Even bishops. Probably even saints. You just manage them. Like taxes. Like weather. Like the strange twitch in your eye. That's probably just stress, right? You enter a household where laundry day has turned into delousing day. Clothes hang beside the hearth, steaming slightly as the fire scorches anything too small to scream. A woman flips a tunic over with tongs. Gotta roast the seams, she explains. They like to hide in the stitching. You nod, pretending not to feel the sudden need to scrub your own collar. This is the routine: boil, dry, comb, scratch, repeat. Some people coat their bodies in lard and ashes. The idea is that lice will suffocate or slip off. Others use vinegar or rub garlic behind the ears. One monk swears by placing wormwood in his pillowcase. And you're almost inclined to believe him. He looks surprisingly smug for someone with a shaved head and no eyebrows. You pause beside a group of washerwomen gossiping by the river. One shares a tale about a noblewoman who kept a pet ferret trained to hunt lice in her hair while she slept. You laugh. She doesn't. Apparently, it worked. Another woman demonstrates the lice comb she inherited from her grandmother. a relic passed down like fine silver. It has teeth as thin as pine needles and looks capable of either grooming or interrogation. Children learn early how to sit still while someone picks through their hair. It's a bonding ritual, a necessity. You spot a mother with her daughter in her lap, humming softly as she works through her curls, flicking the comb against a tin cup with rhythmic taps. Tap, flick, tap. It's oddly comforting, like a lullaby with lice. Of course, there's debate here too. Did people really carry lice all the time? Or is that just modern exaggeration? Some archaeologists argue that medieval hygiene practices, while limited, were enough to prevent full-blown infestations. Others have found knit casings in preserved combs, bedding, and even the folds of ancient socks. Yes, socks. Either way, people in this world assume lice are a fact of life, and so they adapt. You pass through the poorer quarter of town, where houses are too crowded and beds are too few. Families sleep side by side. Warmth is shared. So are pests. Blankets are aired daily. Floors are swept with stiff brooms. But still, the itch returns. In the wealthier homes, things are only slightly better. Feather beds are fluffed and beaten with paddles. Mattresses are turned. Linen is changed, perhaps even weekly. Herbal sachets are tucked into the seams. And yet, even the Baron scratches under his collar with a look that says he's above it, even while proving he's not. There's a particular kind of soap some people swear by, boiled with wormwood, mint, and sulfur. It smells like rot and regret, but it's rumored to drive out lice. One merchant applies it twice a week and insists he hasn't had a single nibble since Pentecost. You suspect he's lying, but admire the confidence. You stop beside a man at the town square who has taken the bold route bald. His scalp glints in the sun like a beacon of surrender. No hair, no hitchhikers, he jokes, tapping his head. You don't tell him there's something clinging to the collar of his shirt. He'll find out eventually. Another man swears by sleeping with his shirt tied tight around his wrists and ankles, an improvised pest barrier. His wife says it works, but only if you enjoy waking up in knots. And then there's the tragic comedy of the communal cloakroom. At a feast, cloaks are hung together in a hall. By the end of the night, they've traded more lice than favors. A barber you meet tells you he once found 3 different types of lice on the same nobleman. That's what happens, he says dryly, when you borrow someone's hat and their horse. It's easy to laugh, but you start to realize this isn't just about insects. It's about dignity. Every comb stroke, every roasted tunic, every herbal sachet tucked behind an ear, it's all an act of resistance. A way to push back against a world that constantly tries to crawl into your skin and stay there. As night falls, you lie on a straw mattress, listening to the sounds of others scratching through thin walls. You try not to move too much. Try not to think too much. You close your eyes and imagine a world without itching. But just before you drift off, something shifts under your collar. Of course it does. The air is heavy with morning fog and the sharp tang of something foul. Not just manure, not just waste, something older. You step cautiously through a narrow lane where windows tilt above like watching eyes, and from one of them comes a sound you now know far too well. Splash. A chamber pot hits the cobblestones. You freeze. It misses you by less than a foot. And now you understand. This is how you earn your place in medieval society. Not by lineage, not by trade, but by learning where not to walk before sunrise. Toilets, as you may have guessed by now, are not exactly a strength of this era. You glance upward. A crooked face peers out from the window, shrugs, and pulls back the shutter. No epalegi, no embarrassment. The waste has been flung, and the world must adapt. You sidestep the puddle. It's a daily ritual. In many homes, especially in towns and cities, the chamber pot reigns supreme. It's a humble lidded bowl, usually ceramic, sometimes tin, always too full and emptied too rarely. Each family has one. Some families share. You don't ask how many people have used it before you. You don't want to know. And where does it go? The answer, invariably, is outside. Through the window, into the alley, down a trench, sometimes into a dedicated cesspit, but more often directly into the street. If you're lucky, the household calls out a warning first. Garde-a-lou. a mangled version of the French gardes low. Watch out for the water. If you're not lucky, you find yourself in what is politely called the splash zone. Some cities, like Paris or London, have basic drainage systems, gutters that line the middle of the road, where filth runs like a slow, sorrowful river. These are sometimes called kennels, and you learn very quickly not to stand near one during rain. You step over one now. The contents are indistinct, but the smell is enthusiastic. There are public latrines too, mostly near marketplaces or town gates. They're rudimentary, wooden benches with holes cut above pits, but they serve their purpose. Sometimes, if they haven't overflowed, or collapsed, or been repurposed into a chicken coop. Honestly, it's a bit of a gamble. In wealthier homes, there are garderobes, stone or wooden toilets built into the castle or manor walls. They often open into a chute that drops waste into a moat, or into a pit that gets emptied by someone you hope is paid very well. The name garderobe comes from the belief that hanging clothes nearby help keep them free of pests, the ammonia fumes supposedly killing lice. It's as if medieval sanitation was just daring itself to be more creative. You find yourself walking alongside a castle wall now. The garderobe juts from the side like a little balcony of doom. You watch as someone settles inside. There's a long pause, then a distant plop. You imagine the moat below, shimmering and sinister, more cesspool than defense. It's not an exaggeration. Castle moats were literal sewage traps. Invading soldiers weren't just repelled by arrows. They were dissuaded by what historians diplomatically refer to as wastewater. And what did people use to wipe? Here's where things get inventive. In rural villages, moss, straw, or even leaves do the trick. In towns, it's often rags, reused until they disintegrate or become sentient. In monasteries, there might be shared cloths, washed, hopefully. Some places use handfuls of hay. Others, their hands, washed after. Sometimes, a surprising number of people use nothing at all. You overhear a merchant boast that he owns cloth squares specifically for bathroom use. He calls them arse rags. He says this loudly. At dinner, you quietly slide your bread farther from his plate. There's a particularly vivid passage in a 12th century text where a monk praises snow as the cleanest wiping material. You try not to think about the logistics of this. You fail. Winter must be an emotional roller coaster. A child runs past, kicking a leather ball that lands in a puddle you would definitely not describe as water. The other children groan. One boy retrieves it anyway, wipes it on his tunic, and continues the game. You consider never touching anything again. And yet, there's structure here. Some cities have nightmen, sanitation workers who collect waste under cover of darkness and cart it beyond the walls. It's grueling, thankless, and oddly profitable work. The waste is sometimes sold to farmers as fertilizer. Other times, it's dumped into the river. You've already tasted that river water once. Never again. You pause beside a carpenter's workshop where a small sign hangs. Privy available, 1 farthing. A side hustle. You pay, not because you need to go, but because you want to see it. Inside is a plank with a hole, a bucket beneath, and a small pile of sand. There's a twig with a cloth on the end, clearly meant for cleaning. You leave quickly. Historians continue to argue whether medieval people were aware of the health risks associated with poor sanitation. Some say yes. The evidence of latrine laws and sanitation fines suggests a basic understanding. Others argue that people simply reacted to smell and social stigma, not science. After all, germ theory wouldn't arrive until the 19th century. But you start to see it now. The communal patterns, the attempts to manage waste, even without fully understanding it. Rules against dumping near wells. Ordinances requiring homeowners to clear the street in front of their property. The nightly rounds of the gong farmer. The instincts were there, even if the methods were rustic. As you wander back through the alleyways, you sidestep 2 more chamber pot offerings. One misses your boot by inches. You don't even flinch this time. Congratulations. You've adapted, and somehow, that might be the most medieval thing of all. A warm breeze carries a scent you don't expect. Fragrant, almost spicy, with a touch of damp stone and perfumed wood. It doesn't reek of sweat or waste or vinegar. It smells decadent. Intrigued, you follow your nose down a covered lane and into a shadowy courtyard where steam coils like ghostly ribbon from an open vent in the stone. You found it. One of the last surviving good bathhouses. Well, depending on your definition of good. A small painted sign above the entrance reads simply Bäderstube, the Germanic term for bathhouse, common across Central Europe in the 14th century. The building hums with low laughter, clinking pottery, the slosh of water. You step inside and are immediately greeted by warmth, moist herbal, and almost embarrassingly pleasant. Candles flicker in iron holders along the walls, casting a golden glow on the worn mosaic floor. Two musicians, lute and pipe, play softly in a corner, while a tray of honeyed pastries is passed from hand to hand. Someone is singing. Someone else is very clearly massaging someone's feet. And yes, there is a lot more bare skin than you've seen in any chapel, market, or alleyway thus far. It feels suspiciously enjoyable. The patrons range from merchants to monks, all sitting shoulder to shoulder in communal wooden tubs or reclining on padded benches. Attendants walk the floor with towels, pitchers, and knowing expressions. There's a distinct sense that cleanliness might not be the only service on the menu. You sit on the edge of a bench and observe. These bathhouses were once common throughout Europe, especially in German cities like Nuremberg and Regensburg. Inspired by ancient Roman models, they offered full-service experiences, soaking tubs, steam rooms, massages, food, music, even haircuts. Entire evenings were spent here. It was less about getting clean and more about cleansing the soul through sweat, food, and flirtation. But inevitably, lines blurred. A couple giggles behind a partition. A server carries a flagon of wine to a woman reclining in her shift. One man, fully clothed, seems to be negotiating something with an attendant behind a curtain. You glance away politely, or nosily. Honestly, who could blame you? You're witnessing what the medieval world once called stews. Not the edible kind, though they're often served too. These were bathhouses that doubled as social centers and, according to many records, tripled as brothels. The word stew itself became synonymous with vice, and yet many were technically legal. Some towns even licensed them, regulating hours, setting boundaries, and charging taxes on the steamier activities. For a while it worked. People bathed, people mingled, people enjoyed themselves in public, half naked, over honey cakes and warm water. Then came a crackdown. The church, which had always kept a watchful eye, grew more vocal. Sermons railed against stews, warning that warm water invited not only plague, but lust, and sometimes both in the same evening. Public morality campaigns, led by bishops and city councils, shuttered dozens of bathhouses. In places like London, bathhouses were shut down or repurposed. Some became tenements. Others turned into grain storage. The lucky few, like this one, managed to linger in discreet corners of cities that didn't ask too many questions. You overhear a patron mentioning that the Bäderstube has survived thanks to a careful balance. No open brokering, no loud music after dark, and just enough herbal water to make everything look medicinal. Behind a bamboo screen, someone is getting a steam treatment. An attendant ladles hot water on his stones while the bather inhales deeply. Mint, the attendant says proudly. And juniper clears the head, clears the sinuses, maybe even the soul. You slip further into the room and sit beside a tub where a merchant is being scrubbed down by a large man with a loofah that could be mistaken for a weapon. Scrub hard, the merchant instructs. I've got onion markets under my nails. You resist the urge to ask questions, probably for the best. Across the room, someone recites poetry, naked, to applause. And while this all sounds charming, even progressive, there's a darker undercurrent to consider. Bathhouses, in addition to being places of relaxation and negotiation, were also blamed for spreading disease. During outbreaks of plague or pox, stews were among the first places to be condemned. The logic, though flawed, was that water opened pores, and open pores invited pestilence. Couple that with half-naked strangers from various walks of life sharing a room, and the moral panic practically wrote itself. By the 16th century, many of these places would be gone. But here, in your moment, the water still steams. A scholarly debate rages quietly beneath the surface. Some argue that bathhouses were misunderstood, that they provided a vital service in cities lacking proper sanitation. Others believe they were dens of infection and corruption, thinly veiled brothels with occasional scrubbing. And then there are those who view them as an essential part of medieval society, a place where class barriers softened, where deals were struck and poems composed, where bodies, however briefly, were treated with care. You take in the scene one more time. A man snores in a corner tub, his belly bobbing like a barge in warm water. A woman wrings lavender oil into her palm and rubs it along her shoulders with a sigh. An apprentice mops the floor with herbal rinse, humming tunelessly. It is human. It is warm. It is far more complicated than the word bath can ever convey. You slip out before the wine starts flowing in earnest. Outside, the chill of the street hits you with a familiar slap. You smell like rosemary now, and maybe a bit of someone else's soap. And for the first time since arriving in this time warp of sweat and scrubbing, you feel almost clean, at least until the next chamber pot. You leave the steamy warmth of the bathhouse and step back into the cold, gray bones of the medieval street. Your skin tingles from rosemary and the faint residue of shared water. The wind bites sharper now, or maybe it just feels that way because for once, you're clean. Or as clean as medieval standard allow. But here's the thing, you can't stay that way. Almost immediately, you catch sight of a woman in a woolen cloak trudging along the roadside with a basket, her arms thick with firewood and her face slick with sweat. Behind her, a boy drags a bucket through a puddle you sincerely hope is just water. They're already coated in a film of effort. The world here doesn't allow cleanliness to linger. And so, you begin to understand the practical problem with soap. You enter a narrow alley and stumble upon a woman stirring a copper pot over a fire. The fumes hit you like a wet brick. Fat, ash, something vaguely acidic. She's making soap, or what passes for it. A thick gray substance sloshes around the cauldron, smelling like burned toast, spoiled meat, and an argument with nature. Homemade soap in this time is no scented luxury. It's tallow, animal fat, mixed with lye, which is harvested by soaking wood ashes in water and then praying. The result? A powerful, caustic, slippery paste that gets things clean but strips skin along the way. Using it on laundry makes sense. Using it on your body feels like punishment, and yet people do, because it works. Sort of. The woman lifts a ladle of thick, gummy soap and pours it into a wooden mold. Later, it'll be cut into bars and sold or traded. Smells awful now, she says with a shrug, but it keeps lice and sin away. You chuckle. She's not entirely joking. Soap is both rare and valuable. Most people don't use it daily, not even nobles. It's stored carefully, rationed, protected from moisture. Sometimes it's mixed with crushed herbs to help with the scent, or at least distract from it. A bar of imported Castile soap, white and smooth and fragrant with olive oil, is a status symbol, displayed proudly like a silver goblet. You pass a merchant with just such a bar nestled among his trade goods. He shows it off like it's treasure. Spanish, he whispers. From Valencia. My wife won't even use it. She just smells it. You can't blame her. Further down the road, you find a group of children playing with bubbles, scooping thin films of soapy water from a laundry bucket and flinging it skyward. The soap bubbles shimmer briefly in the gray light, then vanish. It's beautiful, fleeting, absurd. Much like bathing. You pause at a stream where a woman is scrubbing linens with the same gritty soap. Her hands are red and cracked. Don't get this near your eyes, she says flatly, scrubbing a stain like it insulted her goat. Or your secrets. In some cities, soap making has become an official trade. Soap guilds in Marseille, Venice, and later London begin regulating the craft, setting standards for ingredients and production. But here in your medieval corner, it's still mostly a home recipe passed down like a family curse. Soap has its enemies too. Some religious voices warn against overuse. Bathing and scrubbing, they argue, lead to vanity, to pride, to inappropriate thoughts. Clean skin becomes a temptation. Clean hands, a luxury. Best not to indulge too much, lest God notice you're getting ideas above your station. You catch sight of a priest adjusting his robes, and for a moment, you swear you catch a whiff of soap. Not the sharp tallow kind, but something floral foreign. A gift, perhaps, or contraband. He walks briskly, expression unreadable. You decide not to ask. Elsewhere, a woman crushes dried herbs, thyme, bay, and lavender, and mixes them into softened soap paste. For the baby, she explains, as she rubs a dab onto her infant's neck. He smells like cheese otherwise. The baby gurgles in agreement. In the noble quarter, soap is a mark of refinement. Even if you don't use it, you display it. Perfumed soap carved into delicate shapes. Rosewater bars wrapped in silk. Some nobles perfume their hands with soap, then powder them with ground iris root. It doesn't clean so much as signal cleanliness. A sensory illusion. You catch part of a conversation between two courtiers comparing their soap stockpiles, as if they're discussing military strategy. One boasts of a cypress-scented bar from Sicily. The other claims to have soap infused with crushed pearl. You suspect both are lying, but elegantly so. And still, the debate endures. Did medieval people actually use soap regularly? Some scholars believe it was more common than we think, especially among urban dwellers. Others argue that it was mostly used on laundry and objects, not bodies. There's truth on both sides. What's clear is this: soap wasn't disposable. It wasn't automatic. It wasn't waiting in a pump bottle beside the sink. It was effort. It was craft. It was something you thought about before using, something you worked for, and often you made do without. You pass a baker with flour up to his elbows, using fine ash from the oven to scrub his hands. No soap, he says, shrugging. Fire's cleaner. You believe him. As twilight spreads its long gray arms across the rooftops, the scent of lye and lavender lingers faintly in the air. Somewhere, someone is still boiling fat into something hopeful. Somewhere else, someone is using soap to scrub sins from their collar. You walk with purpose, the world now layered in its true texture, part sweat, part ash, part ambition. Soap doesn't solve everything here, but it tries, and that, oddly enough, is its charm. At the edge of town, where the houses thin out and the fields begin, you hear the rhythmic thud of paddles striking wet cloth. You follow the sound to a bend in the river, where women in rolled sleeves and soaked skirts form a semicircle around a flat stone embankment. Their voices rise and fall like a tide. Gossip song, grunts of exertion, punctuated by the slap-slap of laundry hitting rock. This is the laundress's domain, and here, clean is loud. There's no soap bubbles, no dainty scented bars, just a battlefield of steam, soaked hems, and stubborn stains. Cloth is pounded, twisted, wrung out like a guilty confession. Wooden paddles crack against the waterlogged linen with such force that it startles a nearby goose into flight. You sit on a rock to watch, careful not to look too idle. These women are working, and there's an unspoken rule here: contribute or stay out of the splash zone. A young woman rinses a chemise in water that's more brown than blue. She eyes the cloudiness and adds a few pinches of powdered chalk. It's an old trick meant to whiten cloth by illusion more than cleanliness. Looks brighter when it dries, she explains, not stopping her work. Smells the same, though. Laundry, in the medieval world, is more than a task. It's a public act of virtue. If you clean your linens regularly, you're assumed to be a person of order, discipline, perhaps even honor. A filthy shirt implies laziness, madness, or disease. People may not see you bathe, but they do see your shirts. And they remember. You walk along the riverbank, stepping over woven baskets filled with soaking garments. Some are patched to the point of becoming fabric mosaics. Others are delicately embroidered, the monograms barely legible after countless scrubs. One woman winces as she kneels back onto the icy stone. No man ever sees how hard it is to make him look clean, she mutters. But they all notice when he's not. You believe her. There's a rhythm to this place. Soak, lather, beat, rinse, wring, stretch, repeat. Clothes are snapped into shape and draped over hedges, low fences, or even the backs of patient donkeys. The air smells like wet grass, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of overworked hands. A girl nearby is sprinkling ashes into her rinse water. You raise an eyebrow. Softens the fabric, she says, and hides the blood. She grins. You choose not to ask whose. Some washerwomen chew mint or parsley as they work, believing the herbs help guard against sickness, or at least foul breath as they hurl insults at stubborn tunics. One has tied bundles of thyme to her wrists to keep away flies. Another uses leftover bathwater from a noble estate, proof that even secondhand rosemary can lend dignity to someone else's shirt. Not everyone does their own laundry. In wealthier homes, it's the job of dedicated servants. In monasteries, it falls to novices or hired women who scrub in silence while monks recite psalms. In some cities, professional laundresses form their own guilds. They negotiate wages. They organize labor. They even go on strike. You glance up at a woman cracking her paddle over her knee to emphasize a point. You believe they win most arguments. And then there's drying. It seems simple, but drying laundry in a medieval climate is strategic warfare. Rain is frequent. Sunlight is precious. Cloth must be angled just right to avoid mildew and theft. Birds are shooed away. Cats are tolerated until they nap in the wrong place. Some washerwomen stretch damp linens across wooden frames, pulling them taut to keep their shape. Others hang shirts between trees, letting the wind do the work. In towns, you'll see chemises fluttering from upper windows, swaying like ghosts above the streets. But even here, in the open air, the politics of cleanliness play out. One woman eyes another's drying sheet with open suspicion. "That's not hers," she whispers. "She took it from the noble's wash." You nod, not out of understanding, but solidarity. Laundry theft is real. And in a world where fabric equals wealth, one tunic can mean the difference between respect and ruin. You pause beside a younger girl who is carefully removing stains from a pair of woolen hose. She dabs at the cloth with a mixture of milk and salt. "Wine," she says, tapping the spot. "From a feast 2 nights ago." She doesn't say whose. She doesn't need to. Laundry is a record of meals, of travel, of accidents and indulgences. A shirt tells you who someone danced with. A hem shows you where they knelt. A sleeve might remember a slap. A collar can confess secrets. And some stains don't come out. Back near the river, one woman lifts a finished garment, white, crisp, steaming, and sighs. "Clean," she declares, not as a fact, but as a small miracle. Around her, others murmur their agreement, and for a moment, the riverbank feels almost holy. Of course, debate bubbles beneath the surface. Historians argue how often laundry was actually done. Some say weekly, others say monthly. Some believe only the rich could afford regular washing. Others point to records of laundresses working constantly, day after day, for clients both noble and poor. What's clear is this: the work was relentless. It tore up hands. It consumed entire days. It built communities. And it stitched a kind of dignity into people's lives. One paddle, one rinse, one line of dry shirts at a time. As the sun begins to dip and the wind carries the sound of paddles downriver, you stand, brushing water from your shoes. You smell like smoke and thyme and faintly singed soap. But you are clean, or close enough. And in this world, that's everything. A low mist clings to the rooftops as evening settles like ash across the village. You walk slowly now, your boots heavy with stories, your cloak saturated with the smoke, sweat, and scented battles of the day. Behind you trail whispers of bathhouses, chamber pots, vinegar cloths, soap that bites, and laundresses who could conquer kingdoms with a paddle. It's time to pause, to ask a quiet question no one in this age ever really answers out loud. Did any of it actually work? You pass a small shrine nestled beside a well, where a candle flickers weakly beside a bunch of dried thyme. Someone has left a comb wrapped in linen, a quiet plea, perhaps for fewer lice, or for the strength to survive them. The effort, you realize, was never just about being clean. It was about being seen trying. And yet, for all the vinegar rinses, linen shifts, ash scrubs, and perfumed amulets, people in this world were constantly at war with their own biology and often losing. Skin infections were common. Wounds festered, breath stank, teeth rotted. And the plague? Well, it didn't care how many sprigs of rosemary you tucked behind your ear. Still, you hesitate to call it failure, because medieval hygiene wasn't ignorant. It was responsive, adaptive, built on the knowledge they had, the resources they could afford, and the ever-present dread of sin, sickness, and social judgment. They didn't know what germs were, but they knew that bad smells meant danger. They didn't understand bacteria, but they noticed that people who changed their linens more often tended to live longer and smell slightly less like death. You pause at a tavern where two men argue over wine and washing. One insists that bathing weakens the body. The other says it purifies the soul. Neither notices the filth on their sleeves or the lice comb tucked behind one of their ears like a quill. They sip and swear and scratch. And outside, a young girl is quietly dabbing her neck with rose water. Cleanliness was layered. Physical, yes, but spiritual too. It was about controlling what you could in a world that gave you very little control. A world where life was short, bodies were vulnerable, and cleanliness was both a ritual and a rebellion. You pass a cloister gate just as a monk extinguishes a candle with his fingers. His robes are neat, if patched. His face lined but peaceful. He smells faintly of herbs and ink. He nods once, perhaps in greeting, perhaps in acknowledgement of some shared understanding. You nod back. No words are exchanged. Further up the lane, a woman folds her child's fresh-smelling chemise and sets it by the hearth. It's a simple act, a small shield against chaos. Tomorrow, that linen will absorb the sweat and soot of another day, and she'll rinse it in the stream and start again. So did it work? You pass a group of washerwomen returning from the river. Their arms ache. Their hands are red, but they laugh anyway. Behind them, a rooster pecks at a soap scrap someone dropped. He flinches, squawks, and decides he didn't want to be clean after all. And somewhere, an old man boils water with thyme and mutters to himself, "Better to smell like salad than to smell like sin." The open question remains. Historians still argue. Some say medieval hygiene was wildly inadequate, that people lived in filth, and that's why they died so young. Others counter that, for their time, they were doing remarkably well. They note that monks had bath schedules, that cities passed ordinances against waste dumping, that combs, soap, and scented cloths were common in even modest homes. But perhaps the real measure isn't whether it worked perfectly. Perhaps it's this, that in a time when life was raw, unpredictable, and brief, people still bothered. They bothered to scrub shirts until their knuckles split. They bothered to comb their children's hair, knowing they'd be crawling again by morning. They bothered to crush lavender, to boil soap, to carve lice combs, to brush teeth with mint ash and salt. They fought to keep one part of themselves, any part, undefiled. You reach the edge of the village where the fields begin again, and the night air tastes of wood smoke and wet wool. You're tired. Your hands itch. Your boots are crusted with a dozen kinds of mud, and yet you feel oddly light, as though you too have been rinsed, or at least forgiven. The wind shifts. Someone nearby empties a chamber pot. You dodge it, reflexively, expertly. Congratulations. You survived. Mostly. The world softens now. The bells no longer clang, but murmur. The streets you walked, once full of shouting, sloshing, scratching, and scrubbing, now lie still beneath the hush of twilight. Chimneys breathe faint smoke into the indigo sky. A lone laundry line sways gently, its linen ghosts fluttering in the breeze, too tired to haunt, too clean to worry. You sit by a shuttered window, the wood beneath you still warm from the day's sun. Inside, a candle flickers, its scent laced with beeswax and faint lavender. The hearth has gone quiet. The chamber pot rests, undisturbed for now. A shirt, freshly laundered and folded, waits beside the bed like a quiet promise. Tomorrow, you'll try again. You stretch, feeling the gentle weight of imagined dust slide from your shoulders. The memories stick faintly, like the scent of soap on cooled skin or the tickle of straw in a shared bed. But they no longer itch, no longer overwhelm. They simply settle. The wind outside carries no plague tonight. Just the distant sounds of someone laughing over supper, the rhythmic creak of a cart wheel, the occasional rustle of herbs drying in a window. You made it, through lice and linen, through vinegar cloths and chamber pots. You bathed in someone else's